Three, two, one. Well, good morning. Good morning. Another episode of Social Workers Matter. And I'm absolutely happy to be here. The weather isn't too bad at the moment. It's chilly, but it's sunny. So I'm very pleased about that. And of course, always pleased when we have a guest in the house to share something of themselves with us here at Social Workers Matter. And this morning, because it is the morning, it's actually just after 9. This morning, I have the absolute pleasure of hosting our wonderful guest, Professor Prospera Tedam. Good morning, Prospera. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Sylvia,
Are you
and
sure?
thank you for having me.
It is 9 a.m. in the morning. Are you sure you're all right?
It is 9 a.m. But yes, you know what? I'm awake, I'm happy, I'm alive, I'm breathing. So yes,
Yes.
it's a good morning.
Yes. Wonderful. Yes, you're rearing to go. Good, good, good. So Prospera, it's a great pleasure to have you here. As I've said to you in the past, we often, or I often, with colleagues, use your work and so on. But this is an opportunity really for us to just have a relaxed conversation about you and your career and your work and your contribution to the sector. So I hope it's not too much of a tall order at 9 a.m. in the morning, but I'm absolutely confident that we will, you'll have lots of great things to say. So, Prospero, tell us a little bit about, let's start with where you're at the moment, and then we can potentially sort of work backwards. Where are you at the moment? What are you doing? What are you up to?
Okay, so I'm currently based at University College Dublin. I'm Professor of Racial Justice and Social Work, and I started here on the 1st of January 2024. So I'm just coming up to 2 years. And in this role, I teach as you know. We only have a Masters of Social Work here. We don't have an undergraduate, so I teach on the master's program. I have one PhD student here that I support. And aside that, I do the other things that you would do at this level, you know, the grading and all of that. Um, and I guess I'll move back a bit because that helps
Yeah.
situate this conversation. I arrived here from the United Arab Emirates, where I've been for 5 years, and I guess that's a conversation we'll have down the line. And that was an amazing experience, being a Christian Catholic myself and working in a Muslim country. I learned so much about cross-cultural work. I learned so much about working across difference. All the things that you sometimes struggle to teach were easier to teach over there. And it just kind of, for me, the 5 years that I spent there, um, I would repeat that in a heartbeat. Obviously, with some changes, I would repeat that in a heartbeat. But it was wonderful to see how social work in those areas, particularly United Arab Emirates, is not only taught but is practiced. And one of the things that I absolutely loved about being there was the fact that school social work, which is one of my areas of interest, social workers in schools, is a big thing in the United Arab Emirates. And every student will have a first placement in a school.
Oh,
Every
wow.
social work student will have first placement in school. So I give that backtrack because I want to kind of say what I've been doing over the last few years rather than since I arrived here in Dublin, which incidentally has nothing like school social work. There's
Oh,
zero school social workers. And so it's a really interesting move in that regard. But as you know, it is my work, which has been around anti-racist practice, cultural diversity, working across difference, culturally sensitive practice, anti-oppressive practice, and the likes. This is where that kind of in relation to race and racial discrimination, this is where that kind of work sits nicely in terms of being here in Ireland. So there's a real kind of for me, there's a real shift in. I left the UK in 2018, where I'd been teaching about a certain type of, yes, intersectional, but a very certain type of oppression. And then I arrive in the United Arab Emirates, and it's very different. And actually, the whole, in all those years, I just kept thinking to myself, maybe I should have done this sooner. because there's
Can I just
something.
can I pause you for a minute though?
Yes.
Wow, you've given us a lot there. Why did you move to UE?
Yeah.
What was it that prompted you or pushed you or intrigued you about going to work in that environment? Um, yeah, take us there for a minute.
Yeah. So I guess in during practice and while teaching, when we talk about anti-oppressive practice or working across difference, one of the things that I noticed was obviously the high levels of anxiety when practitioners were working with Muslim families.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, what we call Islamophobia, which people kind of disagree with that term, and I won't go into that, but all of that kind of for me was interesting to hear from a UK perspective. And then I thought, well, actually, let's go work with people from those backgrounds. And when the opportunity came, it was one of those things where I wasn't looking to move.
Mhm. Serendipity,
Yeah, I was,
serendipity, yeah.
yeah, I was quite happy where I was. I was at Anglia Ruskin at that time. Um, and the opportunity just arose. I saw it, I took it, I got it, and I went there, and I really did recognize a very different kind of practice. And I'll give you an example of
Yeah,
that.
please, please.
So when we are teaching, when I was teaching kind of family interventions and how you would work with families, my students would always say to me, "But Prosper, can we start with a prayer?" And I said, wow, it's been a long time since I've heard that. But what exactly do you mean? And they said, in any space where we're looking for or we're hoping to generate some really good outcomes and good discussions and not fall out with each other, we invoke the spirit and the blessing of God, or in their words, Allah, into
Mhm.
this space. And so we would always start our meetings with that. And I was like, let's go.
Yeah. Well,
So that was one of the first things that occurred to me was, goodness, right, this is really different, but it's so rich and it's so meaningful. And they kept saying to me, this sets the tone for the rest of the meeting.
yeah. Yeah.
So it was really interesting. That kind of conversation was interesting. Those were the kind of things that I really wanted to incorporate into my kind of my anti-oppressive, my working across difference, thinking actually there's some of the things that we don't do in the UK. Rightly or wrongly, this is not the space for that conversation. But do we start with asking families, where do you want to start today? Rather than I've come with this agenda, thank you very much. Can we go through these questions? And for students to be um, so connected to that way of doing anything because what they perceived or what they had grown to believe was that starting on that note would invariably lead to a very unified and happy ending, whatever that looked like in the meeting. So that was very interesting. That was one side that was very interesting. But it was also really interesting to hear that, when I made comments like, so when I arrive at home and I ask to see, asked to see your parent or it's mothers at home. I'm like, no, you wouldn't be doing that without our father or a male figure. And you're like, okay, thank you very much. Let's backtrack a bit. Tell me a bit about that. I believe that if you spoke to my students in the UAE, they would say to you, we spent the first year teaching Prof what to do and what to say. And it was a wonderful space to be in. To hear that, of course, social work, we've got global standards and we've got the IFSW, we've got things that people say across the world apply. But actually, when you're working with specific groups of people who hold these very strong views and or are linked religiously or in other ways to particular, it's wonderful to be able to start where they're at. And so for me, that was really, really great 5 years that I did. I didn't want to leave, but
Yeah.
it is,
Needs and
yes,
all that. But no, that's really interesting. And it makes me think about the roots, some of the roots of social work. When you think about where social work as a profession
yes,
began,
yes,
um, it has those strong religious connections. Obviously, over time, things have kind of moved on.
yes,
But
yes,
I think even in some of the circles I'm moving in at the moment, people are trying to connect more with spirituality and
yes.
the higher being and so on because life ain't easy.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and yeah, sometimes you do need. But yeah, yeah, yeah. That's really interesting.
Yes.
something I think I'll probably reflect on a bit more as we go
Mm.
on. All right,
Yes.
so that was just an example of some of the sort of huge differences and with practice there and practice here. Um, I'm also interested in what you said about school social work,
Yeah.
um, because again, this is something. I mean, I actually supervise someone who's a practitioner in a school,
Oh, okay.
and she, when I think about the community that she's able to get close to because of her positioning,
Yes,
it's really fascinating. It's like a small community. I mean, so,
indeed.
so tell us a bit about your interest as far as that's concerned, and yeah, tell us a bit.
Yeah. So yeah, so okay. So I got to school. So I got to school social work primarily as a lecturer in charge of working with students on placement, finding them placements, and actually at the time, school placements were not hot. Every time we allocated students for school placements, there would be a queue outside the door. Prosper, we don't want to go to the school. There's no social work, there's no real social work going on in the school. We don't want to go there. We don't want to be guinea pigs. Just because you don't have enough placements doesn't mean you send us to these, what they perceived as substandard, right? And everyone wanted frontline
Yeah.
statutory. You know what I'm talking
Until they didn't.
until they didn't. Absolutely, Sylvia. And so everyone wanted those sorts of placements. So it started from there where I thought, what is it about schools that, students don't want to go to? So anyway, summarizing that, we then decided, well, we're going to have to find out some more about some of the schools and not just go to every school, but start with particular types of schools that work to treat. So that's my starting point with school social work, which is, why don't you think you can learn anything about social work in those spaces? So I kind of held on to that interest all the way through, and was very supportive of a couple of people who came on to a practice teaching what was called. It was a practice learning training. I can't remember what it was called now, back in the day. And I had a number of practice educators who were being observed doing some work with with students on placement. And again, that kind of heightened my interest, only to find that actually in the US, in Australia, in South Africa, these are big, big,
Yeah.
big jobs that take a lot of social workers. That means that, they're recruited into that kind of immediate space of working with children. Anyway, so
Mhm.
that was kind of my interest, and that's where the interest grew. And then, of course, I ended up in the UAE, where every first placement was a school. And I thought, how interesting is that? I've come from a place where students didn't want to go to school placements to one where it's compulsory, and just began to look into some of the work that students did in those placements. So I applied for a research grant, got the funding, and then undertook some research into looking at school social work across 3 countries. So I looked at England, I looked at Ghana, which is where I'm from in West Africa, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, and of course the UAE. And I was looking at the role. What is the role and purpose of school social work in these 3 places? And just kind of that sheer, just hearing what people achieved while they were on placement, hearing what school social workers did to minimize, if not prevent, further harm from children, that early intervention, that I'm there to see that you've come without lunch, I'm there to see that your lunchbox is actually empty, but you've been made to bring it anyway,
Mhm.
just to give off this impression that you've got food in you brought food in. All of those sorts of things made me think, well, actually, there's a missing trick here. And then you'll remember a few years ago, they started the pilot in England, didn't they? I think it was the What Works Centre. I might be
Yes,
wrong.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, they did the pilot. And it was a randomized control trial, so it didn't really yield the outcomes that I thought it would. So it didn't. The findings from that longitudinal, I think it was about 3 years worth
Oh,
of pilot, didn't show that school social workers minimize, or the presence of school social workers minimized children's routes into care.
right.
It didn't show that, but that was what they set out to test. That's my understanding. So of course it didn't show that. But I think what was very clear from the outcomes was that the kind of, if you want, the softer skills, the lower level concerns were all dealt with brilliantly within a school setting, where a social worker was present and dealt with, as I say, things on site. throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think because I had a couple of students a couple of years ago
Mm,
who did placements in schools, and an additional thing I thought was really good was they had opportunities to do direct work,
yes.
which I think in our frontline environment, it's so much about risk, it's so much about processes and so on. That some quite often, as and we know research has shown this, the child gets lost in that whole huge bureaucratic machine. Um, so I used to enjoy saying to students, well, do some direct work, find out a bit about where the child is at, find out about their or work with where they are internally and so on. So there was that opportunity or those opportunities for therapeutic work as well as some of the early intervention stuff. So wow,
And
that's
ab
interesting.
absolutely. And the school social workers we know support children's social, their
Yeah.
emotional, academic. They're a bridge, if you like, between the family and the community and the school. Where children have experienced loss, for example, or
Yes.
there's lots of direct work that can be done. And through my research, found that actually was being done.
Hmm.
It just wasn't given the same level of prominence
Yeah.
as other types of social work. And I think that's a key thing for me. So,
Well, isn't it interesting how things are changing yet again because of
mm,
some of the recent initiatives around early intervention and so on.
mm,
Um, but the school piece, I think, is absolutely underplayed, and even in terms of the levels of pay that social workers in those environments receive.
yes,
That's another bit of concern. But anyway, so that's
yes.
really good. So tell us a bit more that because you've got me going now. Tell us a bit more about the sort of international research that you did with
Mm,
the three
okay.
countries. Yeah.
Yes. So Ghana also has school social workers, but the difficulty with that is that there's role confusion. I think that actually was evident, apart from the UAE, where it's a very set role.
Hmm.
In England and Ghana, my findings were that the roles really confused with the DSL role, or somebody else in charge of child protection or welfare officers and
Yeah.
education support. All sorts of roles were muddled in one. But in Ghana in particular, the what was interesting and a bit concerning was that school social workers also doubled up as relief teachers when the class teacher was absent. So
Well, resources. I mean,
yeah. So
multi-talented, multi-skilled. My God.
so
Yeah,
make of that what you wish, but you think, okay, this is interesting. But so there were those sorts of issues, but primarily social workers in Ghana, school social workers were being pushed into and encouraged to go into the to work with special needs. So children with special needs, children in boarding schools, and so those sorts of spaces. So role confusion was the biggest thing in the Ghanaian with the Ghanaian sample, which is that we turn up and we can do anything from covering for the class teacher, attending meetings on behalf of the principal, and or sitting through children who have been placed in isolation for all sorts of behavior management type roles. So they weren't very clear with what the role was. They just said, and I think there's a paper when it comes out, I'll tag you on it. But there's a
yeah.
paper I think we called it "I Do Everything" because literally that's what the social worker in Ghana was saying.
Remember our generic histories.
Yes, absolutely,
Uh,
absolutely.
so in a way, I mean, I know what you mean because it probably just means a load more work, but
Yeah.
we this profession has so many many roads it can go along. I could absolutely see how that could happen.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So so that was the Ghana kind of sample.
Mhm.
Like I said, the UAE sample, I've that's published, in fact, all three are published, where one of the findings that I didn't expect was that school social workers could support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, or at least some of them, which was very interesting. So, you've got, hunger, poverty. Yes, and some of the work that the UAE school social workers were doing were along those lines, unbeknownst to them. So once we put it all together, I thought, oh, okay, this is quite interesting. And the whole concept around um, good quality education. I don't know what the actual standards are, but
Mm.
good quality education, working towards helping young people understand climate justice.
Yeah.
Were all the things that social
Oh,
workers were doing in these small groups that they were. So UAE is far more advanced, I would say, in terms of that school social work. So they're really ones to look up to if we want to develop that in this part of the world. The UK social work, school social workers, again, kind of similar things about feeling undermined, sometimes by the locality social
yes.
workers,
Yep. Yep.
feeling undermined by
Yep.
them, oftentimes as well, feeling like teachers and DSLs and other people in charge of safeguarding, etc., felt that they were encroaching onto their roles as so if you're going to be doing all the child protection stuff, what's my role? I'm meant to be the DSL. Okay.
Mm.
So there was the role confusion, but also some level of suspicion around some of the social workers in schools, especially if they were students. Well, you're not actually qualified yet. So,
Suspicion from whom? Parents, families, or faculty, staff.
staff mainly, but also that families who felt that families from diverse backgrounds actually
Mhm.
felt very supported by
Yeah.
social workers in schools. They felt that issues of bullying, which were beyond bullying, that were linked to race, for example, racial bullying and harassment, that some of the school social workers were able to pick that up a lot quicker than would a standard teacher who came to say to you, oh, Sylvia, unfortunately, young Johnny, the children laughing at him. That's probably how the teacher would put it. The
Mhm.
social worker would go into a bit more depth to find out what is this about? What exactly did the other child say and what happens? And began or started to look at other things that were factored into the bullying episode, especially children from disadvantaged, deprived backgrounds, children from Muslim and or visually different backgrounds. So we found that actually school social work in England again was struggling with a lack of identity because of that.
Yeah.
There was half of them doing some of the safeguarding and the children haven't brought enough, haven't got meals, so I'm going to request a free school meals. But also there was late collection. What did that mean? And then, unfortunately for us, our research went into the COVID period, where there was a lot of anxiety then from families saying, "My kids were eating in school. They had all the meals they had in school for free. Now it's COVID, we're home with the children. We got no food." But the
Wow.
school social workers were at the front of that, hearing these and then sorting out
Well,
food packages and food
yes, yes.
parcels.
I recall that
Yeah.
the person I supervise, her
Yes.
predecessor, she was involved in some of that,
Yes.
bringing packages to homes and so on. My
Yes.
goodness,
Yes.
honestly, that's something else, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Well,
Really is.
absolutely, absolutely. So a part of me keeps thinking, like you said, there's so many roads into social work, so many things that we do. But sometimes we're waiting for these big headliners,
Hmm.
these massive big headline jobs and roles and what have you, when actually it's these ones that do the everyday.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And one of our participants in the English cohort said, we pick up things that would have gone amiss otherwise. And I think that's the title of the paper. That's out already. But we spot things that would have gone amiss otherwise. I'm walking down the corridor in school. I notice a child who doesn't want to give me eye contact, finally gives me eye contact. They have a bruised eye.
Wow.
So I pull them aside, have a chat, and I find out what's going on. So, it's those sorts of things. The busy teachers looking around a class of 25, 30, yes, may notice the bruising, may ask casually or not, but may be satisfied with the response, may just be satisfied with the response, because otherwise that means a lot of other work where the social worker is going, no, I'm going to bring them in and have this conversation. So we've got so much data from that research that
Oh,
papers are still coming out looking at the
wow.
role and purpose of school social work.
Well, when you get a moment, Prospero,
Yeah,
please do sort of tag me and
yeah,
send me the links so
yeah.
I can access them because I'm thinking of a couple of people already. I've got a doctorate student who's actually doing, well, she's sort of like an ESL and
Okay,
doing a really deep dive into roles and role
okay,
confusion
fantastic.
and blah, blah, blah.
Yes,
So I think that would be interesting for her to read. And then my other supervisee, who is struggling a bit with her identity in the
Mm.
school place. And
Easily done.
yeah,
Easy,
and
easy.
look at the importance of the work that's happening.
Yeah,
And I think, your research would just help to bolster her.
okay.
And yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh
Okay.
gosh.
Wow. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So where do we go now? I don't know if you are ready to sort of talk a bit more about your writing and
Mm.
some of your other academic interests. I'm also intrigued with your working in Dublin. I've done a couple of jobs in Ireland over
Okay.
the past couple of years, but
Okay.
they were short jobs, and I went to Kilkenny, which is,
Okay.
and I only came to Dublin to have a good time. But so tell us a bit
Okay.
about your academic
Okay.
work, your writing, and what's it
Okay.
like being in Dublin,
Okay.
in Dubs. What's it
Ah.
like being in Dubs? Yeah.
Oh dear. Okay. Should I start? Should I start with that last question then? What's it like being in Dublin? Dublin, you know, Dublin's is wet.
Mhm, mhm.
Weather-wise, very similar to England.
Yeah.
And but I work with a wonderful team of colleagues here. I'm in the School of Social Work. I'm in the School of Social Policy, Social Work, and Social Justice. It's a three-subject school, and there's seven of my colleagues in social work, and I work with a brilliant team. And as you can tell from who's involved, social justice, social policy, and us, it just fits really nicely. So work-wise, it's great. There is a housing crisis in Dublin, which you may have heard about. So I think that is ongoing, and that creates some concern about where we're going to move next, and so on and so forth. But importantly, and tied into some of my research and where I'll be going to next with the conversation, is the increasing anti-immigrant sentiment, which is not only kind of Dublin. I know it's Europe-wide, if not global, at the moment. So that's become a huge issue. I don't go past any of the areas where the usual kind of uh, protesting and demonstrations are happening. Um, but it does fill me with a bit of concern for some of my students, broadly speaking, just students generally, people who
Mm.
live around, that, this is what we're experiencing. So again, just wondering how some of my writing, just thinking now philosophically, how might some of my writing reassure people? How might some of my writing going forward help change some of these minds and these narratives? So I guess that's where I am as a person. And that brings me neatly into some of my work and how I've gotten to this point of writing about these things. Um, I think it was no accident that a lot of the work that I did as a practitioner, I worked with children in care. I worked at the frontline, duty and assessment, we used to call it. I also worked in adoption. But when I worked in adoption specifically, I was a senior practitioner for what we call the Anansi Black Families Project. I didn't set up the project. My lovely, she's now a friend, stroke manager at the time, Lorna, she started the Anansi Black Families Project, and it was all geared around representing adoption to the Black community as a viable option for growing families and that kind of thing. And it was at that point that I started to think, yeah, there's something in here that really speaks to me about why working in this way to with a particular marginalized group works well and speaks to kind of my own values. So the Anansi Black Families Project, was kind of a catalyst into all of this, and I began to be really interested then, as you know, in all the disproportionality involving Black children. Now, when I worked with in the leaving care um,
Mm.
service, I did notice that the Black children, racially minoritized children, didn't seem to get enough attention or as much attention as the other children. But you're always a lone voice. Back in the day, you would always be a lone voice having these conversations and probably speaking to yourself because people were either not interested or just too busy with the day job to even want to hear. So you then think, oh, okay.
You're being very kind, but there you go. Yeah, cool. Actually, I'm just thinking of another student of mine who's
Mm,
just finished a doctorate, her thesis.
Mm.
looking at that very issue around
Yeah. Yeah.
how do black
Yeah.
kids,
Yeah.
how do
Yeah.
they fare when
Yeah.
they leave care and so on. And
Yeah.
oh, some of the stories are just heart-wrenching.
Yes.
I,
Well,
I won't say too
absolutely.
much more because she's yet to
Yeah.
have a
Oh,
Viva.
right. Okay. But it is those
Yeah.
sorts of moments where you stop and think, oh goodness, this doesn't feel. Anyway, so then on and on and on, I developed a family support early intervention service in Northamptonshire when I worked there. And that was at the front end of things, trying to prevent children coming into care. And again, but the area I worked was very wide. So in terms of racial minorities, there weren't as many. But what I found then was that there were different ways of approaching social work that meant that you were there with the family, holding their hand almost right from get-go and supporting them and working in ways that was empowering, but also that was relationship based. So I really get to know these families, go in at breakfast times, make sure children have eaten, take them to school. Well, not me, my staff, because I was the PSW for that team,
Yeah.
but it was a really good piece of work. So transition that now to then the Victoria Climbié. And then I got an invitation to the University of Northampton after the death of Victoria Climbié to talk about kind of what might have led to, all the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And that was my first real kind of, right, I'm in the university space talking to social work students about how they might practice differently, learning from Victoria Climbié. So that was it really. And then I found myself in that university part-time and then finally full-time and then faced the real,
Hold your word there for a moment.
yes,
Again, another career curiosity.
yes.
Had you Did you think about academia, um, when you were in practice as a practitioner, leader, senior worker, and so on? I mean, this is just good for I think some of our younger folk to hear
Yeah.
the trajectory. Were you thinking about academia at that point?
When I was, no, prior to that, when,
In a word.
no, yeah, no, no. I did a master's, and then I thought, yeah, I quite like this. I don't mind this. I don't mind reading. I don't mind doing this. I might do a PhD in future. So that was the PhD thought, but it wasn't necessarily connected to then, do you want to work in academia? I was like, well, I quite fancy doing another level of this.
Mhm.
So no. So those invitations around 2000 were the ones that generated all this. Oh, this is quite good. The feedback was good from students, but I think then I thought, yeah, okay, I'll do this from part-time to full-time. And then you begin to really notice, then you move away from service users who were racially minoritized and what you felt that they weren't getting to students who were racially minoritized, and you're thinking, there's a bit of a pattern here that I'm not liking.
Yes.
That whether you're a service user or whether you're a social worker or whether you're a social work student, it feels as though that the odds are stacked against you if you are Black and racially minoritized. And at that point, I'm talking about assignment grade, the usual stuff where more of our students were leaving or failing, and they were failing placements more importantly, which is where my first kind of interest in, okay, we need to be having conversations about what's going on in placement. That led to the Mandela. I think that's one of
I,
my
I have it
ones,
down
which
here as
is
another
yeah.
point to raise. But anyway, carry on.
That led to the Mandela model, and I was really horrified to learn that some practice teachers, practice educators didn't even make efforts to know students' names. Like it was back in the day, it was as basic as that, and they were the student, my student for 100 days.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, there was one of those things, and there was the other thing about accent. So for the African students, it was a lot of conversations around, oh, can you just send that in an email? Can you just, oh, no, 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 I haven't got 2 minutes now. Can you send it in an email? And once we pushed practice teachers, oh, I don't hear a word she says. So every time the conversations were by email rather than verbal or oral, because the practice teacher claimed, or the staff or the colleagues claimed not to understand the accents. So you then start worrying, oh, now I see why some of the service users are struggling. Because if this is the attitude from some people, then what that might mean is that they're not really hearing what the service users are saying. And is that contributing to this overrepresentation? So you're beginning to try and put things together about what is really going on here. But I had remembered from practice that really getting to know my service users from the point of what time do they wake up? What time do they use the bathroom? How do they get the children ready for school? And then a family support worker would walk them to school. And we did this with particular families. Actually getting to know people really helps because you will know that they have strengths and you will draw upon those strengths rather than seeing them as this. So the Mandela came from that perspective where like, I just need something, but I needed something to speak to the African students that were my focus because as I said, I'm from Ghana and West Africa. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, I have one of those names that can and has caused me a lot of upset in the way people have joked. And remind me to tell you about that joke at the end. It wasn't a joke; it was a very offensive one. But I call it a joke now because I'm grown and I can take it. But I did realize that we needed a framework, and I needed a framework that would speak to the population I was writing for. So came up with the Mandela model. It has its own challenges in terms of feedback that people give and how people use it and all of that. But my university was so instrumental in insisting that all practice teachers use it.
Mm-hmm.
They said, no, our staff, our colleague is not going to write this and you're not going to use it. Everyone's going to use it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but we're going to try and use it just to see if we could address this whole thing of this attainment gap. And then, of course, as I'm doing my reading, I find that people like my mentor and friend, Professor Claudia Bernard, I see that
My buddy. Yeah.
Claudia's done work in this space,
Yeah.
Anna Furtlow, and all
Yes.
other people have done. I'm thinking, right, okay, this is an area to look at for my doctorate, which was what then I ended up
Wow.
doing my doctorate in. But you years later, I get an odd email, even now, maybe the last one was maybe a week ago or two, just out of the blue, dear Professor Tedam, I want to tell you my story. So I am still listening to stories of Black students who have experienced racism and other kinds of microaggressions on placement, particularly whether from colleagues or other students or even service users. And some still want to tell me the story. So, you sit here thinking, it hasn't changed, and I'm
Of
just
course
getting a
not.
bit more depressed. Like this is
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
it's still very depressing.
It is depressing and it's very painful. And those kind of the rhetoric around this being a post-racial society is an absolute joke. So, and then I'm now reading things that
Mm,
people are writing, and I'm thinking,
yeah,
I came up in the 80s. How
yeah,
can this still be going on?
because yeah,
And
quite.
it's quite painful and a bit disconcerting. Well, not a bit, very disconcerting. So I can
Mm,
imagine.
mm.
Well, I absolutely identified what you're saying. Wow.
Yes,
Wow.
yes. So therein kind of came my energy and my newly found like, right, Prosper, you're going to spend the rest of your career trying to support people, either practice teachers to understand this better, students to understand this better, or Black students and racially minoritized students, strategies for them to manage and cope, because this
So,
doesn't feel like it's going away.
no,
Um,
no,
and
no.
and and you know, and so this is kind of now my thing. And so
Prospero, what do you think about safe spaces?
so I have an issue with the term in particular. I think safe spaces are good,
Mhm.
but you won't find a safe space in an unsafe organization. So what does that mean exactly? So people will say, "Oh, I want supervision to be a safe space." Well, actually, your whole frigging your building, the walls of the building, the whole structure is toxic. And you're going to create this safe space. Great, thank you very much for 10, 15 minutes. But it means as soon as I walk out, I'm back to being traumatized.
Mhm.
So I want people to start certainly thinking about a great space is great when it's me and you and we're in this space. You're not always going to be with me. How do we just create safe environments full stop? The building is safe, the structures are safe. And by safe, I mean they're devoid of oppression, discrimination, racism, sexism, homophobia, all of that. How do we develop services that are all inclusive so that every part of the building is safe? Not just my 2 minutes with you or my 10 minutes or my 15 minutes.
And,
And
and
so people now have those safe spaces outside
Yeah.
of work. But it
Yeah.
means every time I'm in work, I'm being battered and bruised.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, I think the sort of scenario you've just shared there, it doesn't really address, I guess, the sort of systemic change, the deep change that's
Correct.
required,
Correct.
real change that's required to sort of achieve some of these anti-racist goals that we say we have. I say we. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And what I see in the circles I'm moving in is a proliferation of safe spaces that are being set up outside of
Outside of, yeah.
the
Yeah.
organization. But
Yeah.
what essentially you provide is something whereby people can come and offload their trauma and so on,
Yeah.
and then they
Yeah.
still have to go back to
That's
yeah,
exactly my thing.
yeah,
That's my thing. So the whole concept of self-care is great.
yeah.
I do think that sometimes when we take it, depending on the direction we take it, it can be quite elitist. When people talk about holidays for self-care, I smile. I'm like, oh, okay, it's great. You can do that. And maybe I can too. But I know a lot of people who can't,
Hmm.
you know. And yes, it's all right for people to find their own, what makes them happy, what gives them, what regenerates and what gives them energy. But I think if we keep the safe spaces outside of work, um, I don't think we're moving forward. Yes, we're keeping people happy and safe enough to come to those events.
Hmm.
But what about the daily workplaces? Like you say, the systemic nature of things. Things have got to change in buildings. Things have got to change with the people there. Things have got to change with the systems that allow these things to perpetuate and carry on. And there's nothing um, more telling for me than when it gets to this month, October, and
Mm.
suddenly all the anti-racist stuff is out. I'm like, okay, so what did
What
you do
happened to
for
the
the
rest
other
of the
few? What happened the rest of the year, man? Like, come on, we need, we need. So this is what I'm thinking. So anyway, I do believe that when students go on placements, and I say this, it's not just the practice teacher student relationship, is it? It's also the fact that in the absence of the practice teacher, there's some other colleagues that may be supporting the student or who may be assessing the student,
Hmm.
but there's also the service user. So really, you've got to have a team around that student that are all signed up to this safe space and anti-racism.
Hmm.
And the only way to do that, in my mind, is that you've got a group of practice teachers, practice educators who understand the theory behind it. Not just that I woke up in the morning and I felt it was a good idea to talk about this, but actually, let's go back in history and see what has been happening.
Hmm.
And let's see where change is possible. And let's see where mindsets can change. But also, do we not belong to a profession that's supposed to be doing this anyway?
Yeah, social justice and all that.
So we're
Yeah, yeah,
not,
yeah.
it's not as though we're asking for something that's so far out of our reach. This is actually within reach because it's supposed to be part of our profession. So I think those reminders are great. So coming back to that, then that's where the kind of Mandela
Hmm.
has come from. And then obviously thinking more about these sorts of things. I've written about that and how we might um, support some of our learning in class. So we call it decolonization now. I guess we were doing it years ago. We didn't exactly call it that, but we were just finding culturally sensitive ways of teaching. You look at the classroom, you read the room.
Hmm.
You kind of decide how your slides go, you decide what examples to use. And if you don't know them, it's great to ask the student that they have got some input into that. So for me, then, the next step from the Mandela and all of that was then obviously the tragic George Floyd
Yeah.
incident. At the time that I was, and I'm going to flag my book here, I'm going to do a bit of my
Well
anti-oppressive
done.
practice book.
Yes,
That
thank
was
you.
that's 2021. But I was finishing this book at the time George Floyd was murdered, and I thought I can't leave the book like that. So I did. I emailed my the editor, commissioning editor, and I said, look, I'm going to hold on to this for a couple of weeks. I'm thinking about something. I cannot finish this book while Black Lives Matter has just
Hmm.
erupted again after what's happened. And then I developed the 4D2P framework. Okay. And 4D2P framework is pretty, I think it's pretty easy. I don't do complex things. Anyone who reads my work will see that I write really easily. I don't have the,
Well, why make it unnecessarily complicated?
well, this
I
this is
totally
it.
agree. Yeah.
So the 4D2P framework is around, a framework that helps us see, identify, talk about, and disrupt whatever the ism is going on. So
Hmm. Hmm.
it is broadly for anti-oppressive practice, but I do use it in most of my teaching and my training. I use it for anti-racist practice training. And the 4Ds are around she's trying to find it really quickly. The 4Ds are around a discussion of some description.
Hmm.
You have to have a discussion of what's going on, try to understand what's brought this issue up, and then you discover something, the second D, and you discover what's happening in terms of, oh, okay, this is what happened. I've discovered that discrimination occurred.
Hmm.
And then you have to decide what kind of
Right. Yeah.
discrimination. And that decision making is based on either asking for evidence or, checking in with the story again. You decide what it is. So if it's racism, for example, that's the third, the D's decide. The
Mhm.
fourth D is disrupt.
Disrupt.
Whatever it is, you've got to disrupt. And I'm big into disruption at the moment because
Yes.
I think in the past we've been doing it in subtle ways. You try to be respectful because Joe Bloggs is your friend, or
Yeah.
somebody says, "Oh, they don't have a racist bone in their body. There's no way. Oh, they didn't mean it that way." People make excuses for others, and then we backtrack and we're like, "Okay, I'm going to let it slide." I believe that the disruption bit is around using either policy to say, look, the policy clearly says this and you've done that. Sorry, mate,
Mm.
this is not going to happen again.
Acceptable.
Or we disrupt by either calling people out or calling people in. And I make the distinction because sometimes you call people out and they dig their heels in. They're
Hmm.
embarrassed,
Hmm.
they've been found out, they're going to be defensive, all of that. But you can call them in as well, which is, can I have a conversation with you, Sylvia? Really soon after the event, can I have a real conversation with you? I thought what you did back there was totally inappropriate. And I would actually perceive that as, in my standing, I perceive that as quite racist. Like that was a microaggression, the way you said this. Now, there's benefits and disadvantages of doing the disruption in a quiet way by calling in, because by calling in, people look around, well, there's nobody, it's just me and her. People always believe me anyway, and they might decide that they're not going to do anything about it. But actually, the calling in is very personal, because what you can also do at that point is say, look, I've worked with you for 5 years and you've been doing this. This has been growing. Like this day, that day, that day. I was just waiting, but today, I'm sorry, I couldn't let it go. So there's one opportunity there when you call people in to backtrack and give them a bit more of a history. But there's also a way to say to people, you've changed. There was a time where you and I could have coffee and laugh about these things, but I've experienced you as changing. You've become this, or I'm experiencing you as this. And that's why I didn't want to say it in public. And I'm saying that to you, and I hope you take that on board. Now, so when I do this in training, students say to me, but what if they claim the conversation didn't happen? And I said, well, if you're one of those people who was listening in your social work writing skills session, you will go and send an email.
Hmm.
Dear Sylvia, thank you for that 10 minutes today. It may have been really difficult for you to have heard where I was coming from, but I have been feeling that for a while. And today's incident did not allow me to walk away without addressing it with you. There you are. There you've got your email trail. So I think there's ways of doing it. So my 4D2Ps, those are the 4Ds. Your discover, your discuss, discover, decide, and disrupt, but always underpinned by your 2Ps, which are privilege and power. We all have power in various ways. We all have privilege in different ways. And so just recognizing that you may be in a position of power to stop what's doing because you're the team leader. So you can actually go forth and do that. Or you may have the privilege of knowing the director. You play golf with the director, you go swimming, you do horse riding with the deputy CEO. Therefore, whilst you're swimming, you can have the conversation if that's appropriate. So I believe that, once we constantly have the 2Ps underpinning that process, that we do it well. And I do think it just aligns with social work practice anyway. When you're discussing things, you're trying to find out what's going on. That's the beginning of your assessment. And then when you discover what it is, you've found out what the family's going through, what the individual's going through. and then you make a decision about what to do.
Yeah.
And usually your decision about disruption is to improve or make things better for the family or the individual. So I think it's aligned with that. And while you're working with families, you must always respect them, of course, and recognize the power and privilege that you hold.
Yeah, and as you say, it very much parallels with what we should be doing in terms of our work. It speaks to our values as a profession and so on. I think the reality, however, and I obviously experienced this as a trainer, as an educator,
Mm.
um, actually more as a trainer, is you have very seasoned colleagues who are so resistant, and
Yeah.
feel affronted that they're essentially being accused of racism, let's
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
because you're talking about other isms too, but let's talk about racism.
Yeah.
And I think that's a difficult space to be in at times when you have this resistance, you have this minimizing, and I've even heard things like, "Well, why are we raising this? Why is this being raised? Is it necessary? Isn't it just going to upset people?" And I think, the issue of fragility springs to mind.
Mm.
And let's call it what it is. White fragility, quite often, that feels that, I'm doing my best, and
Yeah.
still I'm being accused of being this, that, and the other. So that's a reality that's in the space. And as much as one might try to rationally, if that's the case, rationally try
Mm.
and sort of work through it, it can still be extremely difficult. And I don't know what your take on
Yeah.
that resistance,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
denial, that minimization to the point
Yeah.
almost of ghosting.
Yeah.
What's your
Yeah.
experience and take on that?
So Siva, I would agree then with I don't know whether you read Zora Neale Hurston's work.
Yeah.
I mean, she says, look, if you're silent, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it.
Yes, yes.
Don't be silent about your pain. Like, you have to take that home. You then have to find this repository to put it in, which is your safe space. You're going to have to ring up a friend. You can take an hour of their time on the phone.
Or your
They probably,
family.
or your family. You're going to be snapping at everyone who wants to say anything because that's the way you are. Why should that be the case? And if it's a one-off, okay, it's a one-off, but why should that be a constant thing where you've got to deal with that outside? You've got to take work home,
Mhm,
basically, or the impact of that trauma home when others just swan around. So for me, I'm not going to be silent about it. And if you do say, oh, there's Prosper again with a bee in a bonnet, she's like a dog with a
mhm,
bone, all those things, say it as many times as you want. It's not going to make it true. Like, you can say that, and I will just keep coming back with, but it impacts on me, impacts on and I worry about the students
mhm, mhm,
who haven't got some of the privilege I have. And that's where I want to take it is look, it's painful. And this whole concept about, and they're pulling out the race card,
mhm,
you
mhm,
know, before the on a football pitch, before the referee or linesman pulls out a red, whatever color card it is, they have the evidence.
mhm.
They have seen it, and there's probably another, they'll go and check a video or whatever it's called now, a VCR that has recorded it, and they go and check and make sure, yep, there was an infraction there. Here's the card that matches. Now, is it because it's just me saying it? Because actually, you've got a lot of bystanders who probably pretending they didn't see or hear because
Yeah,
they didn't want to
yeah.
get involved. But if we were to do the same thing with that, which is rewind that and do it again and say, anyone who saw this, put your hand up, you will see with no repercussions. You'd see that more people would agree. So I keep saying to people, look, there's no such thing in my mind as the race card. You have been racist. I've picked that out. Here is my evidence. Judge it on the evidence and tell me whether you believe that or not. Now that's down to you. I believe that that was racism, and I believe it because of these reasons. And I know the Joe blogs down the road saw, but it's pretending not to have seen because they want to keep out of it, and that's fine. So, do you agree, or do you think then that to avoid these things, should we have CCTV in the kitchen? And then everyone's like, "What? What?" I say, "Yeah. Should we have a camera in this space that appears to have all this stuff going?" And immediately people start, I said, because you're not taking my word for it, and yet some of you heard it,
Mhm.
but you didn't experience it the way I did because either you're not black, so you couldn't experience it that way, Or, oh, it wasn't a microaggression. They just speak in that way. That's just how
Mhm.
they speak to everybody.
That makes it right,
Um,
does it? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so that's fine. So I think for me, like you're saying, these are you can't be silent about your pain. That's one. You need to go away knowing I had tried to do something about it, it didn't work. And that's what leads a lot of us to either leave jobs or move on or go off sick, God forbid, and all of that. But I think we hold strong to Zora Neale Hurston. If you're silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. So that I won't
Yeah,
be silent about it.
yeah, and yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think it's useful for us to speak our truth. It's useful for our colleagues to hear this. Um, and if things were really great, we wouldn't have what we have now, which is,
Yes.
far right,
Yeah.
um, activity and politics and racism going on.
Yeah.
Who would have thought
Yeah.
in this so-called post-racial society that we'd be back here again? Who would
Well,
have thought?
quite, Sylvia, and that really just brings me to this the kind of third and probably final area of my research that I want to highlight is that, I thought that when I look at all the literature out there, I can't reconcile how all of this is out there and yet this is still happening. I
Yeah,
thought, oh my goodness, even I, who's barely started writing about this, I've done quite a lot. I've got at least 35 to 40 publications around these sorts of things. And why is it still going on? That's just me, little old me. Everyone else has done a lot. And then I began to think that actually, um, there's one thing that the murder of George Floyd did, I think. That picture, that video of Derek Chauvin kneeling on his neck, even in my sleep, I can see it. You visualize it all the time. But there was something so powerful about that image that meant that it needed no explanation, that people understood and people saw that was wrong, it was bad, etc., etc. So then I thought, okay, why don't I think about a piece of research that looks at images? What does racism look like? How is it experienced? So for those of you who've experienced it, what does the experience look like in an image? And for those who haven't experienced it, what's your understand? How does any image or picture or photo help you understand racism or anti-racism? So I left it open. Um, and that's where I'm calling it the visor, visualizing racism and anti-racism in social work. That's where that project came about. And I was privileged to invite Professor Mark Dole, who, as you know, was privileged to have him work with me on this project. So he's working with me on this project. We've collected 49 images so far from across the world, from
wow.
social workers, social work academics, students, anyone in the space, in the field of social work. And we've done some analysis. I'm analyzing my batch or the batch using critical race theory. Professor Dole has got his own framework called the PST. I'll forget what that means at the moment. But it's something about the S is symbolic and the T is totemic and the P, I need to check that out for you. He's analyzing the data using that, so we'll end up with two papers. But it was amazing the kinds of things that people submitted as part of this project. And my thinking, before I give you the example of one, my thinking was, will pictures and images do to people what the George Floyd
Yeah.
image did to people?
Yep.
And will it in some way have more effect than the writing?
Yeah.
So
I, I,
that's my
I
current.
so agree with you. I so agree with you because we've got reams and reams and reams of writing, and I'm still seeing papers that talk about the depressing stuff that's going on, and it's in the written form, and it's
Yeah,
powerful.
yeah,
However, a
yeah,
picture says a thousand words. I hate to be cliche,
yes.
and I think you've got something there. You're absolutely right.
So, absolutely. So I think, yeah, so that's where I am with that. And interestingly enough, when we opened the portal for submission, somebody did actually submit the George Floyd image again, even though that was the start of all our thinking. But the one that I will share with this forum is the magnifying mirror. So the magnifying mirror was donated by a white social worker, and she said that it was a Christmas gift. But every time she looked herself in the mirror, in that mirror, she didn't like it because she didn't realize it was magnifying. So it magnified everything. She could see her wrinkles a bit more. She could see all these pores. She could see all of this stuff that she didn't like. And she likened it to social workers or white social workers should be able to look at themselves in that way to really understand how they are complicit
Hmm.
in some of the issues of racism. And that she's never used the mirror since just opening it and thinking, oh, I don't like the way I look, just put it down. But she often
But
wonders,
isn't that symbolic?
absolutely,
You
very
know, you
symbolic,
don't need
very,
to look at the mirror when you don't want to, which I'm also seeing around me. People, white
very
colleagues who were
interesting.
kind of on it, and then now they're like, oh, you know what? I've
Yeah.
had enough of this. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's really symbolic. Okay.
Yes, we're passing on with that. So her view is that, um, let's look at let's take a deep dive. Let's be really reflective. Let's reflect on ourselves. Let's reflect on our behaviors, our thoughts, and what we don't like about ourselves in relation to this issue of race and racism. Let's do something different. And she did talk about white fragility. She said, we're very fragile as people. I was fragile looking at myself and going, God, do I look this bad? That was fragility on my part. But can I imagine how some of my black colleagues must feel each day being that, people looking at them with all this disdain. I mean, it's brilliantly, and we allowed people to upload their image and then explain it, give their own
Ah,
narrative.
okay.
So
Okay.
really, really interesting. And there's a lot, as
When
there's
is that coming
48 books.
out? When is it coming out?
So that has been accepted in the British Social Work Education Journal. So
Okay.
I'm hoping early in the new year that comes
Cool.
out. This is with a critical race theory analysis, and Professor Doles will come out later. But again, it's about still working in this space to see how can I make more impact? How can I get people to understand this? And how can I get people to be a bit more relational, understand the other?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then they won't be the other because you
Yeah.
understand them. They move from being the other to being my mate or my
Yeah.
somebody I know.
Yeah. I mean, the other great potential is that using this medium can speak to a much wider group of folk. It's not just social work.
Yes.
There are so many other industries or professions that need the same kind of treatment, if you
Abs
like. So
ab
yeah,
abs
yeah, yeah. That
absolutely.
sounds so cool.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So yes, so we've got all of these, and I think I wanted to kind of bring that research to the fore by saying this is still my attempt at getting to understand or find ways of helping minimize what's happening
Yeah,
to people from Black and racially minoritized backgrounds, but also getting using it in class in terms of a teaching tool and saying to students, if you saw this, what would you think?
yeah,
Okay, the story behind it is this. And actually, it is a method that we use with when we're working with children on direct work. We do ask people to bring things sometimes to meetings that
yeah. I
mean
mean,
a lot to them. And
I've
when you're
got,
packing
I've
a
got,
child, yeah, go
yeah,
on.
I've got another colleague. She gets us to sort of, to put some pictures together and communicate,
Yeah,
and it's such a powerful thing to do, and you can get all kinds of left field ideas that you probably wouldn't be able to capture in the written form. So I think you guys have absolutely got something there, and I look forward to seeing. I mean, we go to exhibitions and what have you.
yeah,
Look at the
yeah.
impact some of the images that we see have on us.
Yes,
It's
yes.
sometimes a bit unexplainable, but powerful all the same. So I think that
Quite.
sounds fantastic. Yes.
Yeah, I think so, and also takes me back to some of my days in adoption because as I say, the Black Families
Yes.
a project I did for a year. But when children are leaving particular spaces or homes, we ask them to take the things that mean the most to
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll just out of curiosity, oh, can you tell me what this is about? And they'll say, well, I got it when I was 2 or whatever, and they will attach something to it. But sometimes practitioners are too busy to ask, why have you taken A and left
Yeah.
B? We just up with the bag and off we go. So I think, again, that's bringing us back to the basics of social work, that
Mm.
symbols and visuals and pictures and art have particular meanings for particular people. And so we need to ask the questions to hear what that means for them. And people have told us the stories that underpin what they submitted. So yes, looking forward to
Beautiful.
sharing that as
Beautiful.
well.
So
Mm.
I mean, this is something you're currently working on.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a
Okay.
current, yeah, yeah, it's
And,
current. Mm.
all right. Anything else you're working on that we need to be keeping our eyes open for, or is that enough?
So no, so the 4D2P
Yeah.
framework as well. I found a video clip of the Hidden Figures. Have you watched Hidden
Oh,
Figures with Taraji P. Henderson? I found a clip of that explains my model so well, it's unreal. You'd think I watched it before. I mean, it's crazy. But anyway, and so I'm writing a paper on the use of video clips. So there's a bathroom scene. So that bathroom scene, if you've got 5 minutes, just Google that and have a look.
yeah.
That bathroom scene aligns brilliantly with 4D2P. So I'm just writing that as a teaching note for, I haven't published it yet, but it's nearly done. Just to say these are ways to visualize all those steps and then to unpick it in a conversation with students about, oh, okay, so how do we use 4D2P? This is an example.
Thing.
Yeah.
So Prospero, is there anything else that you want to leave us with? Oh, actually, before you do that, I want to know, how do you self-care?
Yeah. That's a that's a really good question because every time somebody asks me that, I really panic because all I do is read more social work books for self-care.
Yeah,
But
all
no,
right.
so no, but what I've started to do now, which people have probably been doing for a long time, is I have a no gadgets day because I
Oh,
was getting really, I'm sure depressed is a strong word, but I was getting really upset by Twitter. Well, I'm off Twitter now, but you scroll and there's lots going on in America and
yeah.
oh, and it's depressing. But a lot of my feeds will come up with that. And I just thought I'm just really sad all the time when I see these
Hmm.
things. And I keep scrolling as well, doom scrolling it's called.
Yes, yes, me
So
too.
yeah,
Bad,
yeah,
bad, bad.
yeah.
But no
So
gadgets there. That's a
yeah. So I've decided my no gadgets day is Sunday. And it just makes life easier. And it's regular and it's every Sunday is I wake up in the morning. Yes, I check it for everyone, the important people's message, and then I switch my phone off, my TV's off, my laptop's off, my iPad, nothing.
wow.
No, and
That,
yeah,
that
and
that's
that
radical.
no, it is, but it's all of Sunday, and then just before bedtime, of course, one has to check emails to see what you're going into work for on the Monday. So
Mm.
then on a Sunday night, I'll quickly go on again before bed just to check. But that's a self-care strategy that I think works, and it's regular because some of the other bigger ones you have to plan with a friend to go to the spa, or and they can't do that date, and you can't do that date, and it
I
just
go on
becomes.
my own.
I do.
I got my own. Sad, sad, sad. No mates. I got on my own. I have a wonderful time.
Okay, that's a good idea. I must try that. I always try to go with someone, but there's all these excuses and reasons why they can't make it. But anyway, yeah, so I try and do that on a Sunday, and that's beginning to really help. But I also try now to once I'm doing that and I'm focused and I'm really thinking about myself, I just want to put myself in a happy place. I'm not going to call it mindfulness as yet, but
Mhm.
I am trying to put myself in a happy place on a Sunday. And being a Christian Catholic, that
Mhm.
aligns with
Church
me.
and thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sunday, I just like, yeah, right, you know what, this is it.
Lovely.
And that, yeah,
So you
yeah,
read, you have a no gadgets day.
yeah.
Okay, that sounds nice. I think I might try to adopt that one. Try to adopt that one.
I know we use our phones to pay bills and everything, so it
I
can be
know.
tricky, but no, just no social media scrolling, unnecessary text messages that you could leave, WhatsApp groups that people are ranting on about something that you have no idea about but want to contribute anyway. No, I'm not doing it on a Sunday. So that's the plan. Um, and I think that kind of works. I am otherwise that's just me.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
It's been
yeah.
lovely to speak with you, Prosper.
Thank
After
you.
such a long time of trying to organize it. Is there anything that we've not touched on that you'd like to leave us with? Um, yeah. Is there anything else that you'd just like to leave us with?
Um, and I think that given what social work is and given what life is, we have social workers on all sides of the aisle, if I can use a political term, some that actually don't probably ever think about or believe in these things because when, as you know, when George Floyd hit, there were a number of local authorities that did make a statement.
Yeah.
Um, as we currently have a number of people not making statements about what's happening in the Middle East, and people decide how and where that's done. But I think that, you know, we have not just the ethical and legal duties sometimes, but we have a real moral one. And dare I say that occasionally, or more regularly than not, I think social workers should be in touch with their moral side again.
Yep.
Just reflect on the moral side of life and say, or think to themselves, am I doing everything that I believe is morally correct and that morally um, I can use morally to call myself a social worker? Because I think that we are the example that people use about the fact that anti-racism can't go away because even if social workers are racist, even if social workers are oppressive, and yet their core fundamental thing is about social justice, then what chance in hell do the rest of us have? We're a good, we should be a good example for others, is basically what I want to say. And if we're not there yet, there's still hope, but we need to be making those efforts and we need to be reflecting on those moral judgments that we make, in addition to the ethical and other things that we've been doing, just to make sure that we're on the right path and that we're doing the right thing as social workers. So my whole thing is about um, do what's right, of course. What's right and wrong is a big kind of debate. Do what's moral, what's ethical, um, but also stand to support people who are being treated in ways that you wouldn't want
Yeah, stand for
yourself to be treated.
something. Stand for
It
something. Yeah.
almost feels like yeah, why am I repeating myself? That's just what it is. So yes, so that's my final thing is stand for something. I think Sylvia, you've said it. And let's not be silent about that pain if you're in a position where you experience any form of oppression. Don't be silent about it. Um, yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
all really. That's the Thank you
Thank
very much,
you.
Sylvia. Thank
Well,
you.
very,
Thank
very well done at just after 9 a.m. in the morning. She's ready to go. Um, so thank you so much, Prosper. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and we look forward to some of the brilliant ideas that you're gonna birth in the early part of 2026.